Nights of the Hunt 5. Caddock had stalked the perimeter of Byrgenwerth behind the trees. It was a moonlit night, and he had started at the lake shore and walked in the forest in an arc around the property until he reached the lake once more. He had so far not seen a single soul around the lone building. He had admittedly thought such a prestigious institution would be larger, but evidently not. Having waited for a moment, just to be sure of its vacancy, he approached from the west side of the lake-facing building. The door he found on the long side was locked, so he started to walk around beneath the grand terrace emerging from the upper floor, facing the lake. On the other short side, he found a door that he could open. He was intimidated by the mess of things he found inside. Seeing how he had come in search of knowledge, having to search through all the books and notes, while brushing aside strange preserved materials and tools in the dusty mess, enabled him to want to examine the entire area beforehand. He walked up the curved stair to a more organized floor. He saw a ladder, but decided to throw a peek out the double door, out onto the terrace. He froze, having only nudged it open, when he saw a man sitting in a grandiose rocking chair, facing the lake. A man so extensively wrapped in ornamental robes that he appeared like an overdressed doll. When Caddock started to question if the man was at all alive, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. It provoked no reaction. He approached the man, who could just as well be dead as he was completely still. Although he was holding a golden staff, he seemed more propped up to do so. When the thought struck him, it felt impossible. But he was not one to make conclusions without verifying. "Master Willem," he whispered. The man turned his head to him, hauntingly lacking the typical animation of a man. He stared at the half spheres of the mask until he realized that it had become very quiet. Since he first came into the proximity of Byrgenwerth, it had felt eerily still. But now, the sounds of the wind and the water were completely gone. He had to step in place just to make sure he had not gone deaf, which he hadn't. It was like standing in a dead silent room. Only he and the man in the chair made the faintest sounds. He glanced at the door and was startled by how the man, most likely Willem himself, let out a meek gasp and planted the staff into the ground. He immediately turned back at the mysterious golden mask and the sickly-looking lower part of the face. The gesture did not appear pleading to him, despite his disabled state and the quality of the low gasp. With the intense stare of those unseen eyes, it appeared more like a command of a master. Once more, Gadok turned towards the door. It was still silent around him. Quickly he glanced at Willem, then walked to the door. He looked back while doing so, seeing how the man still kept his face aimed where he once stood. When he reached the door, he looked back one last time to see the head turn back towards the lake and pick up the staff to have it rest in the lap like it was initially. Carefully he opened it to peek inside. He was quick to open it just a bit further when he did not recognize the Interror. It was someplace else. In one way, it was an impossible sight. Yet the Interror was not too foreign, and shared resemblances to the space he had previously been in. But this was much grander. He opened it up fully and peeked inside, into a grand and long hall with chandeliers hanging in the ceiling. A hall that was much larger than the entirety of the building it supposedly was housed in. Shelves stood along the walls and walkways ran above him along a second floor. He looked back at Willem, who did not acknowledge him doing so. He opened up the double doors fully and stepped inside. In between examining the quiet hall, he would look back at the door to assure himself that it remained open while he advanced into something that should not be. The shelves, standing with the short end against the wall, contained many sorts of utilities and even specimens of various kinds. Books and cases, all appearing disorganized, while the rest of the space was neatly kept, perhaps a little dusty. His footsteps echoed over the wood floor. Having passed a couple of doors on both sides, he stopped in the center of the hall. He approached a door to the right that was locked, so he walked back to try another. He saw one located on the opposite wall that he tried. It opened into a laboratory. Several desks connected to each other stood in the middle of the room, with shelves beneath them and crowded with all sorts of dubious instruments and materials. Most commonly he saw massive jars with eyes of different sizes. Eyes also lay exposed on the table in the process of some operation, among other specimens of small animals that all were malformed in some way, like in the process of melting. Some even shared some glossy characteristics with aquatic life. Feeling revolted by the specimens, he started to distract himself with every book he could see. It was a mess of all kinds of subjects, but one stood out as a handwritten notebook by a man named Stanton. No mention of its contents were seen anywhere. The note simply started on the first page. Notes he did not fully comprehend the reference to. It could be notes seemingly taken in the moment during some unknown process. Degrees and amounts of chemicals were noted. Among other things, he did not know what it was. It had to relate to a single process, or the writer had no intention of sharing these specific notes, as they appeared very random. when the pages turned blank, he flipped through the rest to find that it resumed on the very last pages. Mr. Stanton seemed to have started a new process by writing in backwards order of the pages, starting from the end of the book. It began with several excerpts noted from other pieces of literature, as each was ended with a note stating where it was taken from. Each and every one related in some manner to the ancient Pthumerian queens. Not a single one, but the title and the shared concept of the position. Through them, he was taught the definition of a Pthumerian queen, a nihil, as they were called. Through some named examples, theories and other instances that Stanton had copied down, he got the impression that a queen was something anyone could become. How they were chosen was not within their own powers, but a decision entirely made by the gods. And when a womb was blessed with a child, the mother became a queen. He looked up from the pages at the neglected research scene, as its relevance with Stanton's notes was lost upon him. Moving past all the excerpts took him to a section that was likely written by the man himself. He relayed how an unknown creature had been found dead in Lauren. A great beast that had died while with child, and that an umbilical cord had been taken from it. He made specific note that it was paralleled to Great Cos, found long ago. An inhuman creature with a dead child, possessing a great relic. Thus, speculating that whatever was found in Lauren could also be a great one. But then there were more excerpts from books, specifically speaking about the theorized relationship with great ones and humans through blood. Caddock skipped over most of them to find more of what Stanton had written. Now he wrote about how a mother's blood can be altered if pregnant. He referenced several of his own experiments involving slugs. In mammals, they managed to facilitate the growth of a fetus with these slugs, impregnating many sorts of creatures. As soon as the child started to grow, the animal's blood changed significantly, proving that this was likely the case of the natural world. It made Caddock shudder. Not only that the process seemed disgusting, but that the notes very rarely specified exactly what creature he was referring to, making it sometimes appear like they had done this on humans. Seeing some of the animal remains in the laboratory, he could only hope the experiments had been limited to such creatures. Despite the reluctance, he continued. Stanton then tied back to the Pthumerian queens. That their blood must have been holy because it changed, like in their experiments. A divine child entered symbiosis with its mother, altering both of them. What was interesting to him was the mention of several expeditions both into Loran and the Hill to try and locate the burials of these queens. The woman who had been blessed with children, specifically to claim these great relics, the cord of the eye. He closed the book and looked over the room. There was another door that caught his curiosity. He walked around the assembled desks to find it unlocked, leading into a grand lecture hall. Slightly curved rows of seats, each slightly higher up than the former, facing a desk at the center of the long end wall. But he hesitated to enter, as some of the seats were occupied. In them sat, at first impression, students, scholars, awaiting the lecture to start. But almost like how Willem had appeared prior, these two sat slumped as if melted into the seats. Only the difference here, he would discover, was much more literal. Their pale faces were sleek and wet, with large, round, black eyes and slacking jaws. Their arms hung at the sides of the seats, inhumanly long and slender. Out from under the coats flowed a slow-moving substance, crawling its way over the floor like a wide dress. He carefully closed the door and snuck back out through the laboratory into the main hall. There he started heading towards the other end, where there was a similar double door, while checking that the previous one remained open. While at the other end, someone called to him.
"Hey, stranger! Over here!"
A man said lowly, making Caddock freeze. He looked around and spotted to his right that a man was peeking out through the panels of a door at him.
"Yes, over here. Come now. I don't bite."
He spoke deviously. Caddock lay his hand on the blade of mercy under his cape as he approached. He could only see a bald head behind the slightly torn frame.
No ordinary hunter, you are? What are you doing in a place like this? Huh. You can't possibly be one of those clerics, am I right?
No, I have no affiliation with the church.
Yes. Of course you haven't. I could see it from a mile away. But a right and proper hunter you are. Oh yes. Come to the lecture building for answers.
Who are you?
Oh, me? Call me Patches. I like having a look around as well. No harm in it. Now is it?
Caddock had heard liars speak before. That slightly higher tone of voice that appeared forced. That careful word selection, but also formulated at a slightly too quick pace. However, with this stranger, it seemed like it was very deliberate how clear it was.
Such a treasure trove of knowledge. Bergenworth. Don't you think?
Is this really Bergenworth still? Not some dream I've happened to step into.
Oh, yes, indeed. Bravo, good sir, bravo. You are a sharp one. This is the result of much hard work. You can tell by just looking around the place. Of course, someone like you would find this place. Only the very perceptive ones happen into a dream. Just like you and me, eh?
That may be. But what are they doing here?
Looking for a cord as well? Why, I tell you. Seen all those ghastly cadavers? The attempts to grow one. Imagine it. To grow a child. Then, just to take it away. To plant in someone's head.
What?
Oh yes. Marvelous, isn't it? I bet that Provost is very proud of himself. Oh, how I can envy him. The things he must see now. Don't you agree?
You... one of the scholars?
No, friend. I'm like you. We find answers. Whatever the cost. The truth is the most valuable prize. After all...
So, Willem found a cord. Where?
Interesting question. Well, I'm no god. I can't possibly claim to know everything. Perhaps you should look around. I'm sure all those wise men left their notes, detailing the process. Oh, with all this mess, I myself have hardly gotten started.
Yes. Although it does not seem safe. How did you end up here, might I ask?
Oh, like you, I wager. Our minds simply finds us a way.
An awful lot of ass around here.
What did you expect? Don't you know how to elevate your thoughts properly? You really should try and read more of those notes.
I don't. And I don't suppose you would indulge me with an easy answer.
My, you disappoint me, good sir. But tell you what, since we are so alike, I let you in on it. And besides, you'll find it eventually mentioned around here. The key to the gods. To speak with them, to think like them, is something old Master Willem came up with long ago. You'll need eyes, my friend. And a lot of them. Yes, a lot of eyes on the inside.
There was something mocking about his tone. Perhaps he was mocking him or someone else. But regardless, he had grown tired of speaking to him. Yes. Well, I suppose I'll head out then.
Oh, before you do, don't go beyond that door. best head back the way you came in. That is, if you're done poking around.
I think I am, actually. Thanks for the information.
No problem, good friend. And remember, whatever it takes for the truth, eh?
Oh. Caddock sat by the window, gazing outside at the empty street. Beside him sat Lillian. It was but one of the 2 window tables available in the tea house serving area. A gloomy room that suggested many came simply to purchase tea rather than stay for its consumption. At least, once it had been tea. Despite still referring to the many establishment as such, few opted to choose tea as their afternoon drink. He had done so despite the staff's perplexity at the request, and had thus been forced to scrounge up something left behind in a nook of the storages. While he was waiting, he was left solely with the option of perusing the proudly displayed bottles behind the counter, all filled with more or less the same contents. Blood. Having taken their seats, him not yet engaged with his steaming teacup, he looked away from the window to spot how Lillian had her eyes fixed somewhere in front of her at the table. She looked haunting in a way. He knew, of course, that she was upset about her husband, missing in a mystery where the answers was growing more and more complex and concealed. But what disturbed him specifically was how her sorrow started to look like apathy. He had known, but had not witnessed himself, how sorrow sometimes evolve as such. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise. There is still time. She abruptly glanced at him as if startled, then quickly looked away and nodded. His attempt to reassure her did not seem that successful to him, and there was realistically not much more he could say until he would be forced to lie.
We were...
She suppressed a sob that interrupted her words.
James and I... We were talking about how we wanted to have our first child.
There was a random jolt of pain traveling through his arm that made it stiff. But she would not have noticed it just by looking at him.
I had been a bit scared. And he understood. We hadn't been married that long. I've always known I wanted to be a parent with him by my side.
Her eyes became glistening with tears.
I don't know why I waited. After all, I knew it would be him. And look where it got me.
We're gonna find him. I know we will. She sniveled and rubbed her eyes with her lower palms.
Thank you. I'm not giving up hope. I've been thinking about it. How stupid it is. But then again, perhaps I would have been alone anyway.
Now, don't give up all your life just yet. It's that drive that keeps our hunt going.
She smiled a little, although her eyes were still sad. I don't think you've called this a hunt before, Mr. Caddock.
Maybe I haven't. He turned to look at his tea and found that his appetite for a beverage had been long lost. Perhaps so much so that it was never there to begin with. Upon returning his eyes to the street, they did not linger for long, for they were caught by the faded yellow collar of a coat stepping through the entry door, having emerged as suddenly as a spectral visage. It was Henrik that immediately spotted him as his head turned right, and he moved to sit down opposite him. No one emerged behind the desk to receive the new customer. Quaint. And your company? Henrik remarked upon sitting down. He did not take off his feathered tricone, but he did unbutton the face collar. Lillian. She has been helping me with the investigation. Henrik nodded and turned towards her, grunting and maintaining a bobbing of his head. She, equally as quietly, gave a single nod back at him, discreetly wiping her eyes while looking away from him. What? You're not ordering? Caddock remarked with little genuinity and nodded towards the counter filled with red bottles and absent of a store clerk. Henrik turned slowly in an almost exhausted manner to look, but was quick to redirect his focus back at him, shaking his head. Gods no. Can't be good for you. Why? Consuming it regularly? Henrik nodded, and they both became quiet, reminded of old times. You know, something's that's funny to me, Caddock began, and Henrik looked up from the table at him. Saw from my window that they were taking off the bark from a tree outside. Henrik rolled his eyes and smiled faintly. It was in fact rather strange to see him painted in such an expression. Of course. More popular than liquor, it seems, he remarked sullenly. Yet they did not need so much cork for liquor bottles, Caddock added, equally sullenly. You had something on your mind? Henrik eventually asked, and Caddock straightened himself from hunching over the table's edge. Yep. But first I wanted to ask you. Noticed anything strange on your hunts?
Henrik's eyes became narrow, and the mouth turned upward in a dismayed and pondering grimace, as well as throwing a brief glance at Lillian.
Strange question. I mean to say, what about the other hunters? Are they performing any differently? Perhaps there are peculiarities with these church hunters?
Henrik's head shook slowly, eyes fixed into the table. The motion gradually transitioned into him tilting his head from side to side, and the face once more contorted by unsurety.
No, aren't we all church hunters? I mean those in black. Oh, well, perhaps. But you know me.
Caddock nodded, knowing how his social abilities were somewhat lacking.
Seen anything? Notice how they act on the hunt?
Once more he bobbed his head while searching for a reliable account within his mind.
Perhaps they're a bit stale. Stale? Well, you know, they're not at it like we were.
Again he glanced at Lillian, who had leaned in closer to the table with an apparent interest. He looked to Caddock, who urged him to continue silently.
Seems like they are more harassing anyone. Not just beasts. Seems like they are frightened of the real stuff. Have you seen this? Happens all the time. For good reasons occasionally. You know how it was. Sometimes a man had yet let loose the beast within. Then it was easier. A lucky break, I suppose you could call it. Not so much of a reliable strategy, no? Targeting harmless folk. Indeed. But that's why it happens so rarely.
That what happened to James? It sounded like she wanted to accuse Henrik directly, but had enough fearful respect left for the hunters that it still came out somewhat timid.
Her missing husband,
Caddock interjected.
And this is not the time to throw around blame, mind you.
But that is what could have happened. She looked back at Henrik, now with a more steady tone. If even you think these hunters in black are unreliable, who knows what their agenda is? They might not even be affiliated with the church, for God's sake. Henrik nodded and leaned his elbows on the table, resting his chin against his hands held together.
The hunters are a disciplined lot. Hard to conduct such dubious agendas while under the watch of Ludwig.
But possible, Caddock said, and Henrik nodded agreeingly.
They are, after all, specialized in early signs. He looked Lillian into her eyes for a long time. She never once wavered away her sight. Then he sighed. But you seem pretty sure of yourself. They are sharp, but there are many of them. And, I suppose many tend to think it's normal, with who they deal with in the night. Caddock looked at him for a moment. He thought himself to see in the man before him someone that had pondered the reality many times over, and found himself speechless at every turn. It was a topic most, especially Henrik, wanted answers to. How can you protect them, and what actions should you take? He thought to see a man that had concluded that silence was best, and simply to hunt. I need to see it for myself. The, black hunters. You hunting tonight? Always. Do you mind my company? Not at all. But are you gonna carry yourself with that? He pointed carefully at his left arm. It will be fine. As long as I have a partner. You up for it? He nodded. I have, taken to hunting company lately anyways. But Caddock. He paused and averted his eyes to Lillian. Finding this man, it likely won't happen. We both know that. But I need to be sure what they're doing. What do you think they're doing? Taking people. Henrik looked back at him. Like the old hunters would. The old hunter nodded and stood. I'll see you on the round plaza once the hunt begins. The sky was set ablaze by the setting sun, truly akin to a roaring fire in how the clouds caught the vibrant rays from the unseen glowing orb. Caddock could feel the impression of warmth slowly rising from under his coat as he looked at the view. He was alone in the narrow and upward winding street, seemingly so alone that even the inhabitants were absconded. It was only the metallic tapping with a cane's end between the sounds of his boots hitting cobblestone in the enclosed area. Beyond it there was only the sound of a distant wind, and in light of the hour, perhaps some of the more audible, peculiar sounds of the breeze had a different, more disturbing origin. A smirk escaped him. After ascending a small staircase of smooth stone, he stood in one of the garden areas surrounding the round plaza of the cathedral ward. There was a gathering of people. Had it not been for their somber idleness, one could imagine it being an afternoon festival gathering. Around the edges of the gathering were ordinary men, mostly men it seemed, holding unlit torches, rifles slung on their backs, and sheathed armaments at their waists. Further in, there was a slight distinction of white garbs. Surrounded by the properly and agile dressed hunters, with their variations of reinforced and sturdy attire. Caddock, however, quickly brushed past the spectacle and found two men standing off to the side. A tall man, dressed entirely in black, with a white scarf around his neck, sat hunched forward on a bench, while the second, garbed in faded yellow, stood by the side. Just when he stepped out onto the round plaza itself, did Henrik turn his head towards him, and Caddock quickened his pace. The two of them nodded at each other, after which Henrik extended a hand indicatively towards the seated man.
Gascoigne.
The man stood and reached out a hand. Caddock leaned the cane against the bench and grabbed it.
Caddock.
My pleasure. He seemed much younger than Henrik, and wore an attire he initially suspected to be one of the black hunters of interest. But with a broadly brimmed hat with a domed top, the modest, holy representation of the Healing Church iconography, and the shining black coat with an arm's-length overcoat cape, his visage suggested foreign characteristics. Otherwise his face was sternly shaped, and he had the beginning of a goatee.
They always tend to stall.
They all turned towards the crowd. Only now did he see the watchful head of the captain turning over the gathering.
Just need to see that everyone gets here.
They watched as an incredible giant character, wrapped in a white mantle and sporting a black church hat, was guided onto the plaza. In its hands it held meekly onto an axe the size of a small horse. Caddock flinched when he saw it, due to how suddenly it had appeared, in light of its clumsy demeanor and loud footsteps.
Oh, my. The church must be getting desperate.
He chuckled, but none was affected by his mood.
Well, the cathedral ward is still free of beasts.
Gascoigne grunted.
Can we begin early, perhaps?
Caddock turned to Henrik, who examined his cane.
Was wondering what you would bring.
He pointed towards his other hand that emerged from under the waist-length cape. Caddock balled his fist to trigger the latch that released the tension of the contraption, and he moved his arm out from under the cape. He held it straight out to the side and released the switch, so the metallic reinforcement around the arm became stiff once more.
Ah.
Gascoigne leaned in closer to examine the joints at his elbow, to more intricately understand the mechanism. On his forearm, he had fitted the barrel and chamber of an old blunderbuss, but had moved the trigger within reach of his fingers.
Huh. Clever.
He loosened the restraint once more and turned the outer forearm towards Henrik.
Have you tested it? Aha. Takes the force quite nicely.
Henrik nodded.
But I thought you preferred paired blades.
He indicated with his eyes to the uncommonly thick cane, appearing more like a broadsword with a mechanical cane hilt, possessing a handle trigger.
Only got one reliable arm now.
Oh, it's impressive. Gascoigne reached for the sizable axe, leaned against the bench. An iconic thing, somewhere between the appearance of a woodcutter's and a battle axe with a half-circled edge.
Ludwig wouldn't mind, would he?
Henrik turned to look at the crowd, then back at Gascoigne.
No. Perhaps it is better that we are ahead of things.
Caddock nodded, and they headed towards the ward gate by walking along the edge of the plaza.
Where to?
Henrik looked ahead as they came up on the great bridge approach.
What is it exactly we should keep an eye out for?
Out of the three, Gascoigne was the tallest, yet undoubtedly the youngest. Although the question was not unjustified, it made Caddock wonder about his experiences nonetheless.
We cannot stay within the grand troop. No use. We get ahead and lurk to the side to catch someone suspicious, separating from them.
Who is suspicious?
You'll see, then.
He looked forward as they continued their walk over the bridge. But out of the corner of his eye, he could see how Gascoigne debated internally whether he was satisfied with the answer or not.
You see, if I'm right, we'll notice off-putting behavior you might miss if you don't look. I think there are charlatans amidst the hunters.
Charlatans?
Indeed.
Caddock stopped after having crossed the great bridge and looked back at them, with the bridge still remaining empty.
Call it people taking advantage of the hunt. A fitting night for someone to disappear, right?
Gascoigne's brow furrowed lightly, and he averted his eyes. Just after having entered the central Yarnum from the great bridge, they turned down a narrow metal-fenced stair that led in between the house rows of stony castle-esque structures. The little landing took them to a smaller street, running just below the elevated main street, and they had a somewhat good vantage of the travelers who would shortly walk across it, and even better sight on anyone stepping off similarly to themselves. There was a tunnel ahead, running under the main street, where they would see someone emerge into if they so choose to step off it. Caddock walked all the way into the arched passage to the other side, while gesturing for the others to remain at the opposite opening. The company of hunters arrived up above, just when the sun had truly vanished on the horizon. Not a single uttering or tone of voice could be heard as they passed them by overhead. Standing slightly behind a tower-like expansion of the row of houses, looking up towards the street, he saw the raised torches, rifles and pitchforks jutting up from the darkened faces as they marched onward. The company passed by, and the light vanished with them. A few street lamps were lit, but otherwise the night was cloudy and grew quickly into a blanketing black. Leaning out slightly to peer beyond the structure covering him, he could not see his hunting partners on the other side of the tunnel, as they were most likely obscured similarly as he was. Then two shapes appeared at the base of a staircase running down from the bridge. Their black silhouettes had been completely obscured while walking down against the wall, and he could only make them out for a moment as they passed at the edge of the light of a street lamp before quickly turning down into a narrow opening between the houses. He emerged back out of hiding and waved towards the direction of his party until they hurriedly, but silently, came over. They headed into the same alley the two church hunters had taken, emerging onto the street over. The two characters walked with composed steps away from them, each bearing a shining white, holy shawl and hoods on top which sat a black trilby hat, matching in color with the rest of the attire. They spied on them from their darkened corner as the pair walked mildly down the street, carrying no source of light. A few windows that still had a dull glow within them faded out by their approach, or were smothered by the drawing of the curtains. By the end of the walkway, one of them stopped and looked to the other. They approached a doorway to a residence that lay in darkness, just like the rest. Being quite the distance between the two of them, Caddock only saw them standing stiffly by the door, completely motionless for a few moments. Then they opened it. What are they up to? They have their mark in there? Gascoigne walked out from the corner without looking away from the door that had closed behind them. They followed him, proceeding to approach slowly. He anticipated a sound would be heard from the invaded residence the closer they came, something that would reveal a reason for the nocturnal visit from the church that appeared all too polite to be the home of a marked individual. But only the distant shrieks of some ghoulish abomination perishing in the hunt was to be distinguished. They did not walk up the entire way, but waited nearby for some 5 minutes before the two emerged again. Now, one of them had a conspicuous bundle in their arms, while the other closed the door. It was a small child he saw. He felt Henrik's hand trying to stop him when he flew towards the two. His approach was enough to get their attention, and the two froze.
What is the bloody meaning of this?
He hissed, screaming as low as he could, so as to not awaken the entire street. Their faces were largely swept in obscurity. The child's head stirred and looked around, a sleepy mumble escaping her. The one holding onto the girl did so caringly, and now took a step back, while the other advanced towards Caddock, holding a church pick in his hand.
Stealing away people in the night? What in...
Caddock, ease off.
Henrik intervened, stepping in between the two. He quickly turned to the church hunter and whispered,
"A mark?"
A stutter came from the man, only the lower part of his face visible from underneath the hat.
Yes. Off to the orphanage with this one.
He motioned to the child.
Right. Can I see?
Excuse me?
Your marks.
Another mumble came from the girl, who was swept in a blanket.
We better...
It's for an investigation approved by the captain.
Caddock intercepted the Black Hunter's excuse.
It just shows that you are supposed to be here.
He distinguished a perplexed frown beneath the brim of the hat, looking in between him and Henrik. Then he looked back at the one holding the child. He started fumbling with his coat's inner pocket and retrieved a small booklet that he flipped through. Henrik slightly turned on his belt lantern and held it up as he turned the pages. There Caddock could ultimately see, after verifying by looking up at the building, that the address was indeed present within the book.
Badge?
He sternly asked, and the hunter swiftly retrieved the Holy Blade badge, seemingly from the same pocket as the booklet.
All in order, then.
Both Henrik and Caddock stepped back. The two hunters remained in place, visibly flabbergasted, even in the vague visibility. Henrik ultimately cleared his throat awkwardly.
Encountered some fiends that way.
He motioned in the opposite direction they had arrived in.
Best head back to the Great Bridge. Ludwig's company just passed. Saw the lights.
Again he pointed down the same way. Their heads turned.
Very well. Good hunting.
They hurried past and vanished back towards the bridge. Caddock wordlessly stepped inside the residence, leaving both Henrik and Gascoigne outside waiting. His boots fell silently upon a carpet as he continued into the hallway. One door lay straight in front of him, and two open doorways lay on both sides. To the left was a kitchen and a dining room. To the right was a living room, where he located a staircase. Ascending the steps took him into another corridor with one door on each side, both of which were slightly ajar. Upon the door on the right were small drawings of stars at waist level. The door on the left turned smoothly in its hinges to reveal the horror inside. A man lay on his stomach in a pool of blood, one arm outstretched towards the door. Had it not been for the blood-stained white bed, the woman in it could just as well have been asleep. He did not go in further, for he knew not of any beasts leaving a scene so cleanly. This was simply the stuff of nightmares. He emerged back outside with his shoulders hung low, head turned down. Henrik stood with his arms crossed, while Gascoigne appeared much more expectant for his reaction.
Was it bad?
Not now,
Henrik said sharply, but quietly. The young man quickly looked his way, then had his eyes drifting down into the cobblestone.
Is it always like this?
Caddoc looked at Henrik. He was unbuttoning his collar, scratched his shin, then rubbed his eyes.
It has always been like this. Just another mark, huh? Mm-hmm. You can confirm it with the captain. The child will be reported as well. You'll likely find her as a reason for action. And what if I don't find them in the documentation?
Henrik closed the high collar over his lower face, briefly lingered looking down in the ground, then started walking.
Well, then you have found their hunting grounds. Those suspicious hunters of yours.
The hunt continued further down the street. Henrik was as quiet as ever, which Caddoc thought strange. At least he remarked on it. For despite always being described as a quiet and drawn-back man, it only struck him more impactful in moments like these. He, too, had seen particularly horrifying hunts, which caused himself to doubt if he left the profession not solely due to injury. But here they still were, both of them, old hunters on a mysterious night, none being better off than the other. The moon had yet to show itself, and the night remained difficult to navigate. Though the town was not wholly swallowed up by it, the illuminated sections proved to only increase the influence of the surrounding darkness and its imposing sensation. Caddoc preferred the murky parts, for he believed it was there the black hunters would dwell, where no one thought to look, even on a night of the hunt. While walking down in a line along the street, hugging the facade, a figure became noticeable quite suddenly, like it simply was conjured from the ground, or was a previously inconspicuous object that abruptly came to life. Its movement was what made him see it. A hunched and compact body of solid blackness that walked further ahead on the opposite side. From the distance, it looked not to be taller than any of themselves, perhaps even shorter, and it moved slowly forward until it stopped again. It was then apparent why it had been missed to begin with, for it grew to become so still, one could not imagine it to be alive. Gascoigne stepped out into the street like a prowling wolf. Caddock went further ahead, while Henrik stepped around directly over to the other sidewalk. Gascoigne approached quickly, but the thing remained still. Yellow eyes were illuminated like a bolt of lightning in the sky. A freakish scream erupted, while the monster exposed its full form in a leap towards Gascoigne, claws outstretched and yearning for his neck. Gascoigne stepped forward and drew the handle of his axe out towards opposite sides, extending the hilt and jamming it with full force towards the incoming fiend, like thrusting a spear. When the beast swiped at the axe, twisting its body in the leap, Gascoigne turned with the momentum of the deflection and spun around fully out of the beast's way. In the same spinning movement, he let the long-handled axe swing around to be brought down with a curved edge straight into it. Caddock heard from further down another howling creature responding the hungry call already emitted. He cursed to himself just when Henrik flew past him and sprinted on the opposite side of the street. His arm tossed to the sides back and forth 3 times, indicating he had thrown 3 small, serrated knives into the prey, a tool that was impossible to see its travel within the night. 3 pair of yellow eyes shone in the darkness, the accursed sign of the bestial hunger. He followed pace, and upon focusing, was able to awaken his old hunter senses, now more clearly being able to outline the threat. While Henrik fired the customary provoking bullet, Caddock braced his legs, freed the contraption, and took aim to release what felt like a cannonball exploding out from his arm in both force and sound. He had perhaps been too generous with a sizable chamber, but his brace took the punch well enough, although he did not feel the need to splurge with his shots. All the same, he slammed the chamber open and jammed in another round for later. The brief visibility from the gunpowder explosion lit up the streets, and the 3 beasts were illuminated. Recently turned, as judged by the tattered clothing and the patchy, irregular growing fur, being like a fully fledged mane in some places, and barely noticeable elsewhere. He stepped forward to meet with the monstrosity, swiping horizontally with the cane sword. While he did so, he triggered the tension of the small wheel, and the blade loosened into pieces along a wire, causing it to spin violently around the frame of the cane, somewhat reminiscent of a furiously spinning conveyor belt. Due to this, it was not the force of impact of his blow that caused the blood to spill, but a burst of a mechanical saw that rendered its flesh. He jumped back and the freakish head turned his way, having suffered from the hundreds instantaneous cuts, with a half-torn skull, with the jaw either hanging loose from the sustained damage, or simply open so wide from sheer unhinged rage. It arose onto its hind legs and stomped clumsily towards him, like the art of walking was truly lost to it. The movement became the source of power as it plunged both clawed paws down with all its might. Caddock jumped away and braced his fall with a metallic braced arm and rolled onto his feet. While standing, he released the latch for the cane to fully liberate the extent of the serrated wire, while hearing another terrifying, blood-curdling roar from afar. While swinging with the looped wire like a whip, he repeatedly pressed down the trigger on the handle. The perpetual bursts from the spinning wheel caused the whip to come alive, and by swinging correctly with the rhythm of his pressing, it was also under his bidding. He swung it down so the built-up force ran over the stone with such might that sparks flew with such brilliance one could see the mark it left in the street. The beast swiped with its hand towards it to deflect, but in a terrible display of blood and grinding noises, the hand was agonizingly severed from the body. A second, slightly larger but lankier fiend flew past the devastation of the serrated whip, and while jumping backwards, he pressed for the tension to retract the whip into solid blade form. The beast landed just in front of him, and he once more took aim with the arm cannon. But he never pulled the trigger, for Henrik had run up behind it and now plunged down his saw cleaver into the beast. Now being distracted, Caddock instead leapt aside and fired at the initial, now one-handed beast, to shift its attention away from Henrik. It exploded into its shoulder, yet it was still able to crawl towards him, kept alive by the unfathomable thirst for blood. He stepped backwards, released the whip, and started swinging it at the beast, never intending to hit it, but only to build up enough momentum as he pressed the trigger to make it spin while stepping further back. Finally, with a downward backswing, he could maintain its furious rotation like an elastic wheel turning against the ground. Perhaps it was the copious amounts of sparks against the stone that sent the beast reeling backwards in fear, or the memory of what pain and desolation had previously caused. While he stepped forward, forcing the beast closer to the house wall, more sounds came from further down. The frenzied charge of the vulpine madness. He stopped the spinning, and Gascoigne ran past from behind him with a broad downward swing with all the momentum of an arching overhead strike. The impact crushed the beast so thoroughly that one could mistake the axe blade
as a blunt hammerhead, eliminating the last of the prey. He grunted and wiped his mouth before turning briefly to Caddock, then over to where further terror sprung. He grabbed the end of the handle and right below the axe head and pushed it together, reducing the length by half.
We should press on.
Henrik tossed with the cleaver so the blood splattered from it. With a more brisk pace, they continued along the buildings towards the sounds. It merged onto one of the main streets, which was especially precarious to traverse outside of a large group. But seeing the flickering shapes of light cast faintly over the street, Caddock took the lead and headed towards it. On the night of a hunt, the air was filled with many sounds, and it was never truly quiet, despite the initial impression. When one listened closely to the qualities of the perceived silence, one would distinctly begin to hear the chaos shielded by the darkness. One would hear monsters in every shadow, and the battle of hunters down every street, but distant enough to fill one with grave doubts to one's own senses. The volume and distinction of the sounds ahead became more prominent as a true clashing of sword and fang. Upon realizing the true nature of the battle ahead, he abruptly turned around where Henrik came briskly walking, almost colliding with him. He shook his head at them before quickly walking the opposite way.
What?
Both Henrik and Gascoigne stopped and expectantly looked at him.
No time. They will handle it.
Who?
He pointed the cane towards the light.
Whoever is hunting. We have different prey, remember?
Ah, bloody curse. You can't just choose your prey.
Gascoigne turned and resumed the approach. Caddock followed and hissed at him to stop.
Caddock?
He stopped upon hearing Henrik's voice. He turned and looked at him while Gascoigne continued forward. He looked at him with eyes reflecting the warm light. Eyes that from behind the mask managed to convey great dismay. It frustrated Caddock.
Whoever is up ahead, it is not the Black Hunters. Who knows what they are doing all over town?
Henrik shook his head and followed after Gascoigne. Looking at the dark street behind them, Caddock began grinding his teeth. Upon seeing that his two companions were soon to vanish behind the rounded street, he ran after them. He did not manage to catch up with them, for when he had reached their previous position, they had flown into a sprint of their own upon seeing the chaos ahead. A rounded four-way crossing was the scene of horrific carnage. A pyre of burning wood in the center, and beast cadavers produced a sickening smell. Around, like dancing to a bewitching spell, holy blade hunters spilled blood to their heart's content. They seemed not bothered that beasts came from the shadows to make furious attempts on their lives, but rather welcomed them into the ceremony. Their movements never stopped, appearing as if tired and energetic at the same time. They swayed and heaved, but were quick to lunge into a new flurry of expertly performed attacks at the nearest fiend. His two peers stood out in contrast, calculating the targeting of their foes with precision, chipping away at the beast's durability one by one. But the white, garbed and regal holy blades must have been possessed by the divine spirit of the gods, granted unending vigor as indicated by their bloodthirsty, rampaging and wild assault on anything that moved. One could even question if they could tell friend from foe. Caddock ran up and circled the edge of the plaza, and took the opportunity to fire at one of the lesser beasts, closest to the edge of the battle. If they did not slay the beasts in a proper manner, it seemed the hunt itself would be the thing tearing the holy blades apart. Just upon landing the shot, not bothering to reload, he sent forth the serrated whip to lash the hulking brute over its back. The fully transformed muscle turned, looking like a hungry grin, and rushed towards him. He proceeded to run along the edge and made a pirouette while simultaneously pressing the trigger. The resulting blow that the whip produced upon turning around caused a large scrape mark along the facade, and impacted with the beast so it was practically cut in half and thrown towards the pyre, blood spraying copiously in the process.
That's right! Send them off!
The voice was barely audible over the gunfire, fleshy impacts and the metallic clanging of the trick weapons. Caddock tightened the scarf around his mouth and nose, and took the opportunity to reload his firearm. Upon completing the maneuver, he leapt up and swiped with the cane so it only grazed the top of a beast's hind legs, but was enough to distract it from the unaware holy blade it was about to pounce on. Upon turning towards him, he never managed to set the whip into a spin, for its entire body was crushed to the ground under the incredible weight of the Kirkhammer. The rescued holy blade brought it down a second time, seemingly only for his own satisfaction. Despite the beasts having all been dispatched, the tension did not fade quickly. The previously white-garbed hunters, now stained nearly completely red, paced around as if wanting the beasts to resurrect. He walked over to Gascoigne, who stood by the pyre. There he saw how, on top of the charred carcasses of hideous aberrations, lay even more badly scarred and scattered remains of seemingly normal men and women. Gascoigne's breath was heavy, but one more composed, suggesting the source not to be from fatigue.
Let's be off. No need to linger.
He nodded, but delayed with tearing his eyes from the fire. One of the holy blades approached them. His expression was composed, but became an eerie one due to being drenched in blood.
Timely arrival. Linger about, and there are sure to be more of them. We prefer to move about.
The man shrugged.
Your preference? There's blood to spill everywhere. Wouldn't you agree?
The two of them walked past him. Caddock did not know for how long Gascoigne had hunted, or how many nights it had been. But he thought himself to know at least when one could see that there had been enough hunts. Now he thought to see how Gascoigne shared that expression Henrik displayed after leaving the house prior. An expression the three of them all had experienced now. He recalled his old hunting days. What he tried to see leading up to a blood-drunken case. He had never managed to predict it, for it was never the ones he thought. Never in his time did they use to so arrogantly display their vices. Back then he had thought it would look something of the kind. Hunters struggling with hiding it. At times it was just that. But he distinctly recalled that those that most frequently fell to his mercy were his fellow hunters with that specific look. It was a grim sight to see in the young hunters. A horrible fate to read. But he had also come to learn that fate was not entirely written in stone, for not all the hunters he had seen with those vacant eyes, and at a loss for words, did ultimately appear at the end of the blade of mercy. He only knew that a blood-drenched hunt made man into something else, putting them under the spell that it was mercy. He could only pray that whatever true redemption there was in the hunt, that it would find them before Eileen did.
Hunter axe. One of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used on the hunt. Retains the qualities of an axe, but offers wider palette of attacks by transforming. Boasts a heavy blunt attack, leading to high rally potential. No matter their pasts, beasts are no more than beasts. Some choose this axe to play the part of executioner.